What we've done in the first 5 JavaScript sessions was largely talking about the grammar and explaining all the different concepts you can find in JavaScript and how to deal with those and so on. I thought for the 6th one, we would do something different, and we would try to implement some of this stuff or use it in a real world context. And so what I've done, and you can actually see them on screen, is I have 2 problems here. Both of the problems they were slightly modified, but they come from a real world project that I was involved in. So they were real world problems that I needed to implement as part of a larger project. And I thought we could use those to not only talk about how you can do this. I think I have 2 different solutions I need to check now, but I think I have 2 different solutions in both cases. Yes, I have. That's good. So we'll see how far we get with those. And then if you think that you know a better way of doing this, then I'm all open for that. But what I want to show you is not only that you can do this with JavaScript, but there are usually different ways you can do it. And different ways have different advantages and disadvantages. And also, I want to give you at least a little bit of an idea of the methodology that you can use to to get this done. So let's get started. I hope to finish this in about an hour. If you've been at any of the previous JavaScript sessions, you know that hope is probably futile, but we'll see. So let's start by setting up an environment here that works. I don't know if you remember how to do that, but I will walk you through it if I still remember. So basically, I have a folder here, and I already created this index file in there. And actually, what I will do, I think I can. I don't know what's going to happen if I do that, but let's see. So I pasted all of this code I have in this document in the chat window. You can pick it up from there and copy it into a file that you call index.js. And then it might be easier to follow along. But we need to still convert this into a Node.js project. And so if you remember from previous sessions, if I right-click on here, there is a menu item called Open an Integrated Terminal. And the advantage is now I have a terminal window, but the terminal window is already in the right spot. It's here in this session 6 folder. If you want to verify that, I can do that. So I would need to do something like this on a Mac or dir on Windows. So I'm in the folder where I already have this index.js, so that is good. And if you remember from the first sessions, I can now do npm inits, and npm inits will initialize a Node.js project. And because we're smart, all of these should be good, even the index.js. Is this okay? Yes. So you can just go through all of it, and then it tells me at the bottom, as you can see, there is one package that I'm using here, npm actually in this case, that has an update version, so I could update that. I'm not going to do that now, but what we did was initialize this as a Node.js project, and that gives me this this thing here. And I'm actually going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to steal our typical dev from one of the previous sessions. So put that in there. Why is it in red? Because I have no comma at the end of the previous one. So in the package.json file, I added now a line called dev, and then the command associated with that is nodemon index.js. JS. And I can save that and we're a lot further. But we need to install NodeMon. That's what we did previous times as well. If your memory is good, you might remember that it's something like this, if I'm correct. So npm install, what do I want to install? NodeMon, and I want to install it as a developer dependency. And so there we go. And now in my package.json, it has under the header development dependencies, it has added NodeMon, and I have 2.0.4. I don't care about the version. I just want NodeMon because I am going to use it here. And then the last step was that I have to run this development script. So npm run, and I can just use the name of the script I've used in my package.json. And when I do that, I start NodeMon, and NodeMon will now watch my session 6 folder, and it will automatically, so let's test that that is the case. Every time I save a file in that folder, it will automatically run the index.js file, and then I can see the result down there. So that gives me a very quick way of writing code and going through iterations. And I think it's worthwhile mentioning, and this is something that you'll see as because I'm not just going to copy the text in here, but I'll show you how to construct it. It's something that you will see as we go through here, that being able to do iterations and test very quickly is very important. So let's give us some space. That's not going to make any difference because every time I save, Prettier is going to put it back. So that was a bad idea. Let's start with example number 1. And basically the question in this case is, let's assume that you have a project, and in that project there is a file naming convention. So I know that I'm going to have PDF files that consist out of 3 parts, and in between the parts there are going to be hyphens. And the first part is going to be a 6-letter client code. The second part is a 5-digit job number. And the third part is basically the name of the job, and it can be anything. Yeah. And the important part here is not this specific naming convention. The important part is that in many projects, you will have some kind of naming convention. And the question is, how are you going to deal with that? Let me give ourselves a little bit more space here. And seriously, meanwhile, if you have questions, just interrupt. That's much better than waiting until the end, because then you've probably forgotten them. So we have this naming convention. How do we go about writing a function that will take as an argument a file name, and that will then spit out the 3 parts of the file in some way? And the part that I have already included there is perhaps the most important part of this whole exercise. So the first thing that I did, and I actually did this as well when I was preparing this, this session, the first thing that I did was come up with an example that follows my naming convention. 6 letters, 5 digits, an arbitrary name. So this follows my naming convention, and that means that this is a string that I can test with. But what I've also done from the very beginning is come up with 3 examples of things that don't follow the naming convention, or that I think could cause problems. And of course, I can find many more than the 3 that I found here, and you might want to do that if this is real production code. what is important is that you realize that it is best from the very beginning to give yourself some test data as well. And in reality, if you're a developer, it goes much further, and they tell you to write all kinds of test cases and even write the test cases before you write the code. I'm not going this far here, but I am going to insist that it is important that you do something like this, because when you do this, just thinking about what could go wrong will give you a perspective on how can I write this function? What are the things I need to look out for? Are there maybe things that if I write this function in a certain way that I won't be able to detect, or that might cause problems in the end? So if you're asked to write JavaScript, please go through this step. It's important. And what I've done here as examples is the first one is actually one that obeys the rules. A, B, C. There are 3 parts. And this one here. So 3 parts. Why have I included it? Well, I've included it because my name includes a hyphen. And because the hyphen is used as a separator for the different parts, I can naturally kind of imagine that having a hyphen in the file name, that could be tricky at some point. Yeah, I can imagine situations where that could be a problem. So I've included this example of a file name with a hyphen in order to make sure that when I start testing my function, I don't forget that that's an opportunity or a possibility, and I don't get bitten by it in the end. The third example is one that is wrong. It has the first part, and then it has the second part, but the second part, well, the second part is not what we expect. We expect a 5-digit job number. Instead, this goes straight into the name of the job. So this misses information. So this should, well, we need to decide what we do with that. And then the fourth one is also wrong, but in a slightly more subtle way. I have 3 parts in it, but the second part is 5 letters, and I'm expecting 5 digits because it has to be a job number. I could continue this. I could have an example where there are not letters at the beginning, but digits. I could have something with 7 letters instead of 6 letters. You can come up with all kinds of other examples. It is just important that you think about this at the beginning before you start writing code. That's going to save you time later on, trust me. So we need to write a function that gets the parts of this file name, and we need to decide what we're going to do if it's not a match. Yeah. And so let's start with something, sorry. And I'm going to do function, and we'll give this a name. Let's just call this extract info, and I'm going to have 2 versions of it. So I'll call this extract info 1. I don't like this. It's not a good function name, but it's just for demo purposes. What is the input for this function? Well, someone's going to give me a file name. So I have to have a file name in there. And normally I would do camel case. So it's file name with a capital N. That's the input. What's the output of this, this function? Output should be 3 things, A, B, and C. That's in my specification. I can only return one thing in JavaScript. So how can we return 3 different things? What we've seen in, I don't know anymore which lesson, 4 probably, is that you can define your own objects in JavaScript. So I can return an object, and then I can say return, and what do I want to detect? I want to detect the client code, and we'll just put something in there. I want to detect a job number, and again, put something in there. And I want to have a file name or a job name, whatever you want. And that is obviously penguins. this should already be a viable function. So if I now say console log and I say extract info and then test file name 1, I know I type fast, I'm sorry, and this completion that you have in Visual Studio Code doesn't help for any of you, obviously, because I'm used to it. When I save, look what it writes out at the bottom. It says client code, job number, and job name. So what I know already is that I have a function where I input something and I can give the return that I want. Yeah? And the return that I want will be the client code, the job number, and the job name. The only thing that remains is that I have to, well, extract the information from the file name, but that's details. So what I'm going to, the way I'm going to show you to do that, first of all, is by using something that Jan mentioned yesterday on Facebook as well, which is regular expressions. And the reason I'm doing this is, even though it's complicated, or it can be complicated, is that regular expressions, when you're working with strings that follow a particular format, it's probably one of the more powerful things that you can do in JavaScript. And when you really know how to use them, you can do really cool things with them. Now, I could show you how that looks in code and then explain, and then at the end, you're probably going to crucify me because it's too complicated. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build this together with you. And I'm going to do that using a website that I've discovered years ago and I've kept using over time. If you have some other resource to do this, then feel free to use that. But I use this regex 101 website, and I still find it a very useful thing to, or resource to use. I also have a 300-page book that describes regular expressions. What that usually does is give me headaches, so this website is much better. What is a regular expression? Well, it's actually a separate object or type of object in JavaScript, but its use is much wider than just in JavaScript. You can use it all over the place. You can, if I'm not mistaken, you can even use it in InDesign to do search and replace and stuff like that. And in many text editors, you can use that. And it's basically a way to describe how a string should look and to get parts of that string out. Yeah? And we'll do this step by step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by copying the string that I'm interested in, so a good one. And we'll just put that in our test string area. And what I'm also going to do on the left-hand side, even though it doesn't make much difference in our case, but I'm going to switch this to JavaScript, or ECMAScript as the official name is, because regular expressions and the way they are presented can be a little bit different between different tools or programming and environments. So I'm going to switch it to JavaScript. And now here I have an area to write my regular expression, and I have a whole bunch of support areas on the right. Yeah. So what do I want? Well, I know that my string is going to start with 6 letters. I'm not sure from what I said that they are going to be capital letters, but 6 letters for sure. And if you look at the right, it has an area here with common tokens. And one of it says a character in the range A to Z, small, or A to Z in capital. And then it has an expression for that. And I can just copy that so I don't have to type it. That's cool. And we'll put that in there. And what you see immediately is that this website shows me all the things that were found using that expression. And what does it find? Well, everything that is a letter between A and Z. Now, I'm using this because by default, the comparison in a regular expression is case sensitive. But in what I'm building here, it would be easier if it was case insensitive. So I have a flag for that. And this website also shows me that. So I can say, no, I want a case insensitive match. And when I do that, it is going to add an I flag to that. And that stands for case insensitive. And that means that I can make my expression a little bit simpler because it is now going to accept case insensitive things. So it's still going to find the capital letters in there, no problem. Now, I don't want to find a single character. I know that in my description, it said a 6-letter client code. Yeah, so I know I need to have this letter 6 times, exactly 6 times. How do we do that? Well, luckily, again, there is help. There is this area here called Quantifiers. And that explains how you can specify that you want an exact number, or maybe you want 0 or more of a particular thing, or maybe you want 1 or more of a particular thing. So we are interested in an exact match. And look at this, this says exactly 3 of A. And that is A, and then with curly brackets and the number we want. So that means if I add curly brackets to this, and I put the number 6 in between, it is going to find for me only those things in my string that are exactly 6 characters. Yeah, and I still have 3 matches because there are 6 characters here and there as well, but it's a good start. Now I know that these 6 characters are followed by a hyphen. That's the structure element in this naming convention. So I can add that, and now all of a sudden I only have 1 match. So we're moving in the right direction. Yeah. The next bit was 5 digits, and I could use the same trick as before. So I could say something between 0 and 9, and then I want that exactly 5 times. Yeah. And then I want a hyphen again. If you want to do this, that is fine. Just know that there is also a slightly shorter way of doing this, and you can find this under general common tokens again. It says here that any digits can be represented by a backslash and a letter D, small d. So I could actually remove this part and replace it with a backslash and the letter D. And that means exactly the same. And you can check that here on the right. So you can see here, match a single character in the list A to Z, exactly 6 times, and then matches the character hyphen literally, and then matches a digit in between 0 and 9, so equal to 0 to 9, and exactly 5 times, and then a hyphen again. So what you have on the right-hand side will always display all the rules of what you are creating here. Now, that's not everything. We want to complete this by saying, well, the rest, this area C here, that can be anything, and it can have an arbitrary length. And how do we specify anything? Well, back to common tokens again, I guess. Is it here? Yes. Any single character. So any character whatsoever. Okay. So we'll add that. Notice that it now also matches the I, but of course I don't want one single character. I want a bunch of them. And now we have to decide whether we want 0 or more or 1 or more. And I'm going to assume that the name always has to exist. So it's going to be 1 or more. And I can express that by adding a plus sign. And now it eats up all of the rest of my string. Now, this is not exactly correct. This .pdf is not part of the file name, so I want to specify that as well. The problem is I want to specify a literal dot, but the dot means something in regular expressions. It matches any character. to make that a literal dot, I'm going to escape it. So now it represents a dot, and then I can add PDF. Does that still make sense for people? If you have questions, again, don't hesitate. So short recap, case insensitive, I want 6 digits between, sorry, 6 characters between A and Z. I want 5 digits followed by anything else in an arbitrary fashion, and then followed by .pdf.
What about other characters than A to Z? A to Z, like German and Scandinavian and other strange.
We don't like the Scandinavians, Jan. So
yeah, I know that.
They will not be accepted in the way I write it here. If you want them to be accepted, you would need to add them to the list there.
Yeah, I know that you have to do that, but I mean, if there are others with accents, teckens, and well, German Ys and stuff like that.
Yes, so then you might be less precise. I could say I'm not going to filter on characters. I'm going to allow anything that is not a digit, for example. So that's also a possibility. Yeah. But in my experience, what you will find in many cases is that when someone makes a naming convention, they'll try to avoid things that can complicate things if they're smart. And they might actually limit it to A to Z. Yeah. If they don't, then you have to accept more. And you have to say, for example, any non-digit character, which we could do by replacing this by this, and then it will accept anything that is not a digit. And then your O and AE and so on would be accepted as a character as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go back to what we had here. Now, this regular expression could now be used in JavaScript to test whether a string follows the rules, and that's valuable information, but it's not what we're interested in. What we're interested in is extracting information from this string, and regular expressions have a really cool way of doing that, and that's called groups. A regular expression lets you define a group or multiple groups in a regular expression, and those parts can then be extracted. So what I can say, and it's really simple, a group is just putting stuff in between parentheses. So I can say, I'm interested in these 6 characters here, and then I'm also interested in the digits, and I'm interested in the file name part. And what you can see on the right is that it now says group 1, and it shows you what it's extracted, group 2, and group 3. Yeah. This does exactly what we want. It gives me a way to extract that information. And we still have to see how to do this in JavaScript exactly, yeah, how to use this, although there is it's fairly simple. But this looks like what I want. And this website allows me to go to code generator now. And JavaScript is selected here. And usually this part is very complex, and I almost never consider it. What is cool is that it lets me copy the correct way to specify the regular expression in JavaScript. And that is cool because it looks a little bit strange. It starts with a slash and it ends with a slash, and then it has the options and so on. So it looks a little bit surprising sometimes. So I can just copy that from there, and then I will add that into my function. And of course, it doesn't do anything yet, but now I have a regular expression that describes my file name format. How do I use it? Well, there is a function in JavaScript on a string that is called match. And I could say const result is file name, which is the string I want to test. And then the function is called match. And what it expects is a regular expression. Yeah. And I can run that. And still nothing happens because we haven't done anything with the result. Now, there are different ways of getting the result out. The one I'm going to use here, I always find very strange, but it works and is the fastest probably. And that is when you've run a regular expression, there is a static variable, and is it regexp? Yes, so regexp, like that. And that has properties, and I'm going to use, there is no way to understand what this does. This is just a, as it is built. So there is the regexp object, and I'm using a property of that object called $1. And $1 refers to, if I go back, the first group that was found in the string. Yeah. So if I run this, you can see that my client code is now correct. And then, of course, once we know that that is the case, the other things are easy. I can just do 2, and I can do 3. And that gives me all the things that I want. Now, of course, we would then have to test that, and I would need to say, well, what happens if we have the second thing there? And the second thing works just fine. Regular expressions aren't fooled that easily. What happens if I have the third example? Well, the third example, I get all empty. Why is it all empty? Well, because the third example doesn't fit the regular expression that I've built there. And so the groups are not filled in. And what is important to realize is that not even the first group is filled in. So if you want to use regular expressions for this, that is something that you have to realize. It is either going to accept a string and then give you all the groups, or it's going to not accept a string, and then you're going to end up with empty stuff in there for everything. And when I run this with 4, it's doing exactly the same thing, because again, Hagen that I have here isn't digits, so it doesn't match. The advantage of regular expressions is that it typically lets you write code that is, it's relatively easy to follow, except for maybe the regular expression by itself. It's usually very compact. Whether you like it or not is something else, because regular expressions can be kind of well, annoying if you don't feel how this works. It can be quite annoying to build. You will find a lot of them online. So if you would search on Stack Overflow for specific problems, you very often find answers with regular expressions, and you can use the website to build them. Let's give one more shot to this, because I'm not sure regular expressions would be what I would use in the first place. And there are definitely other ways of doing it. So let's explore another way of doing this. And so we'll do this again, and I'll make a second function. So what else could we do? Well, there is a very useful function and it's very strange that it's useful, because it doesn't usually seem like it should be very useful. There is a very useful function in JavaScript on strings that is called split. And the way to use it is to say a variable, and then I'm going to look at the file name, and I'm going to say split. And when you say split, you have to give the string that is used for splitting apart your input string. And this can be a single character, but it can actually be more than a single character as well. So you really can look for patterns in your string and then split the string up. What does that give? Well, and this is, by the way, also something I very often do as I'm writing code, instead of writing the whole thing and then seeing that it doesn't work, what you can do is you can write line by line and make sure that you have, that you look at what it produces. And that might give you a nicer way of figuring out how to proceed. So you can see what happens. I've run split, and what it returns to me is an array, the thing in between square brackets here, so this thing, an array, and it has split up everywhere where I have a hyphen. This is almost what I want. There are just a couple of problems, and one of the problems is if I do this with string number 3, so if I would say test string number 3, then it's only going to give me 2 elements in my array because string number 3 only has 1 hyphen in it. So that's perhaps not exactly good. And actually, that is something that I probably should avoid. If there is only 1 hyphen, then I know the naming convention is not going to be followed. So I could say, oh, in that case, I'm going to test. So if parts length is, if it's bigger than or equal to 3, 3 is the minimum. I want 3 parts. So in this case, I'm going to do something, and I'm going to return parts, and I'm going to do my error handling slightly different. If I don't find those parts, I'm going to return null. And when I do this, I'm now getting null because I'm doing this with string number 3, and string number 3 doesn't match. If I go back to string number 1, I'm still getting my array. So I've done a little bit of error handling. I've said I'm going to split it up. If that doesn't work, then I'm going to just return null, and null is then an error condition. So in the code that uses this, I would then have to validate that, well, I would look at, does this return null? And if it returns null, I have to give an error. Now, of course, this return parts is not what we want. We want to return that same object that we had before. So I'm going to steal that from here. This is what we want to return, actually. And of course, this regex part isn't going to do anything for us. So we'll remove that again. But this is what I want to return. How do I find that? Well, look at the array that it returns, the one here. It nicely returns the 3 parts. The third part doesn't look exactly correct yet, but the first 2 actually seem pretty okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to fill these in. So I can just say parts. Remember, this is an array. The first element is index 0. And I'm going to take the second part of this array as well. And when I run it now, I already have the client code and the job number. So we're going in the right direction. I can't do this with part 3. And there are actually, contrary to what you think, there are 2 reasons you can't use part 3. And I will show them to you. So let's do this. First of all, even with a correct file name, this doesn't give me the right result because it still has the .pdf, and we want to remove that. So we'll need to do some processing. But let me show you something that is even worse. With the second string, I get these 2 things which are correct, but I only get part of the job name. And why is that? Well, because I also have a hyphen in the name of the job itself. So when I ask JavaScript to split the string, it is going to split it into 4 pieces. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, that's a bummer. So we have we have to find a way to fix that. Yeah. And what I'm doing now is quite, well, I'm sure there are other ways to do it, but I'm not going to bother with that. So I'm just going to brute force it if you want. So what is my job name? Well, my job name, if I think about it, is everything in this array, but except for the first two parts, because these first two parts I'm going to use for client code and job number. So let's reorganize what we do here a little bit. And I'm going to say client code, and we'll actually do this. And then, but I was going to do something else. So parts. Shift, what does shift do? Well, shift gives you the first element of an array and it removes it from the array at the same time. So this is really good because I need the first part as the client code, and then afterwards it has no use for me anymore. So calling parts shift makes sure that those two things happen. It is copied into the variable client code, and then it's removed from my array. I'm going to do the same thing for here, job number, parts shift again. And so now I have an array that only contains the parts that interest me for the job name. And on the result parts, I can just take these things away. So what I'm going to return is going to be, and actually, I should do this properly. I should do it inside of my protective if there. And job name for now is, we'll just assign it something. And let's see whether that still works, and it still works. So once more, I split it into parts based on the hyphen. And then if I have enough parts so that the file could be okay with my naming convention, I use shift on my array of parts, which removes the first element and puts it into client code. I use shift again, which puts the second element into job number. So these two are now okay. And then the third element, well, like I said, the third element is everything after it. But if there are other hyphens in there, I actually want them to be part of the file name. So I'm going to do a very dirty trick, and I'm going to say job name equals parts join, and I'm going to join them again. And join does the opposite of split. It takes an array and it puts all the parts together into a string, and in between it puts a hyphen. Actually, if I do this, it will put commas in between. That's not what I want in this case, so I'm going to give it a hyphen. And if I run this, you'll see the result again. So it gives me two correct values, and I have, even with a hyphen in between, I have the rest of the file name here. If there would be 5 hyphens in here, it would still work. Join just would put all of them together so that I can process them further. Now I still have this .pdf, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. So I've joined it into a string, and then I'm going to split it on the, again, there are other ways of doing that. If I'm certain that the extension is .pdf at the end, I could simply use, there is something called slice that cuts part of the string, but I'm going to do split on the number in this case, and I don't want the last bit in this example. So job name, what was it? Bob, I think. So let's test what that does. So I'm back to almost what I want, but it's an array, and I don't want an array. And the other problem, if I would have a file name with another dot in it, I could have issues with that as well, because I'm using this split again. So I'm going to remove one, and then at the end, I'm going to say job name is job name, join. Now it starts looking like magic, but it actually does the right thing. Is this the fastest way of doing things? Probably not. Is it the most understandable way of doing things? Well, maybe not. I'll leave that up to you, whether you prefer version 1, which uses a regular expression for things, or version 2 that uses other, or you want to write a version 3 that does it still in a different way. Yeah. What is important and what you have to realize is there are usually different ways of doing it. So if you do an online search, especially when, for example, you find results on Stack Overflow, don't just take the first answer. Also read the comments for the answers, because they very often point out cases in which your method might fail. And think about the error conditions and so on. There is a big difference between what I have in version 1 and version 2. And the main difference is that in version 2, even if there is something wrong with this job number part, for example, if it wouldn't be integer or digits, it is still going to give it to me, whatever it is. So I haven't done exactly the same error handling here that I have here. And that might make a significant difference if you start using this in a workflow and you rely on it either way. I can't tell you which way is better, but you have to think about what's going to happen if it goes wrong and how am I going to deal with that. And the fact that I don't check that these are numbers, is that important for me in my workflow, or is it not important? Any questions?
Well, you can always do a match on the client code and job number.
Yeah, you could. You could, or what I would probably do in this case is not return job number as a string, but I would probably convert it into a number and see whether I get an actual number, for example. Especially if I need to calculate with it at some point, it might be important that I can convert it to a number and then give an error if I can't convert it.
But you don't count the number of characters in the client code and then the job number either. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that is the thing. I'm always hesitant to start using regular expressions because they look so horrible and they are horrible to build. But the advantage is that you can do a lot of checking and extraction and whatever in a very limited amount of code, and that is very often a big advantage. Last thing I will say about this is that I always stress the importance of error handling, but make sure that you understand the requirements of why you write this function. I am saying that this has to be 6 characters. Maybe it's not important for your workflow. Maybe you just need to include those characters as a subfolder name or something, but if it's 7 characters, nothing's going to break. Yeah? That is a possibility. If that is the case, then don't insert them. Don't insert the check. Just use what is given to you, and that might be in the end better. The only one who can tell you that is the client. And when I say the client could be external if you're a consultant. It could be internal if you're working in a company and someone else gives it to you. The client could be you. Yeah? There is always a client, and you have to ask the client very carefully what the restrictions are. And I'll share with you another secret. I don't know if anyone saw the popular series Dr. House at some point on television. Dr. House said that all patients lie. It's the same with clients. They all lie. And they don't do it on purpose. They might not realize. They might not realize in a workflow that there are some files that don't follow the naming convention, or it might change after the fact. You might implement code and everything is good, and then someone implements a change to the workflow that modifies something, and it is always better to do some extra error handling here up front than 6 months from now try to figure out why things break and not getting a decent error message. Okay, now what is not good about what I've done here is I've not written any comments to this, and it's probably still small enough that you can easily figure it out, but I'm still doing some stuff where probably I would like to add some comment. Not the comment I'm putting this back together, but maybe a comment to say need this because the file name might contain multiple spaces. Because it is not, it might be obvious now, but it is not going to be obvious 6 months from now why you're going through this. So do yourself a favor when you're implementing this and add strategic comments like that, if nothing else. Okay, that was the first thing I wanted to cover. And like I said, I'm aiming for an hour, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. That's not a surprise. I'm going to comment all of this out so that we don't get information there again. And let's swiftly move along to the second case. And this is also one that comes out of a project, a very recent project, where from an XML file, we got a string for a number, and you can see it here. Yeah, and I can do console log currency string, and then it will write out that thing for me. And then, of course, I wanted as a number, so I could say let currency equal. How do we convert a string to a number? Well, we can do that explicitly. Currency string. There. And let's see what that gives. What's the answer going to be? Does anyone want to venture a guess? No guesses? It's not a number. Why? It's clearly a number. Well, no, for JavaScript, it's not a number. Remember that JavaScript uses a slightly different way of writing numbers. If I would write 1023 as a JavaScript number, I would have to write 1000 and then 23. So the point, the period used as a digital, as a thousands marker is not something that is supported in JavaScript. And JavaScript actually doesn't use a comma as the separator between those two parts, but it uses a period. Yeah. That's kind of annoying. And there is no real good way of, no built-in function to modify from one to the other. So if you want to use this to calculate with, and this was something that came out of an invoice XML, so we needed it as a number to be able to calculate with it, well, then we're going to have to do some conversion. And again, I'm going to show you two different ways of doing it. And I'm going to, I think I have two different ways of doing it, yes. And we're going to start with the, what's supposed to be the easiest way. So, so let's call this currency to number. And my input is going to be a currency string. And then my output should be a number. Yeah, so does this work? It does. Well, actually, I don't know because I haven't used it yet. So I would also have to do console log, and then we want to do currency to number, and we want to do that on the currency string. And now it works. Yeah. If you think that I'm only doing this like this thing like does it work and then running it without any code in it and so on because I'm teaching, then that's not the case. This is actually what I would do in real development as well, because the sooner you see that something isn't correct, the easier it is to fix it. And it's much easier to fix an extra comma or an extra whatever somewhere in this function when it's still empty than once I have 200 lines of code in it. So usually when I do this, I do exactly the same as what I do now. I very rapidly hit Command S again and then run it every time. And if there is an issue, I fix it immediately. Okay, so how can we do this? Well, luckily there is a very nice function in JavaScript and on strings, and it's called replace. And it does exactly what you would think it would do. So I can say result is currency string replace. What does replace do? It looks for one thing, one string, and it replaces it by another string. So what do we want to replace? Well, to begin with, we want to get rid of these thousands markers because JavaScript doesn't use that. So I want to look for a period, and I want to replace it by nothing, actually. Yeah. And replace is a function that I feed some stuff in, and it is called on the string that I have here, and then it gives a result. So what happens when I do this? Oh, I have to return the result, or we're not going to see it, obviously. Well, that gives me 1000,23. This is better already. The 23 isn't, the 23 is correct, but the comma in front of it is not correct. So I can do the same thing, and you can chain these things, and that's actually, that looks quite clean still. So now I want to look for a comma, and I want to replace that by a dot. And now I get that. And if I now want to be completely correct, I could say, convert that to a number. And when I do that, I get the number 1023. Yeah, so that works. What did I say in the first case we did? What I said was, it's important to think about cases, situations where it might go wrong. Well, let me slightly modify this number. Now I have 1,000,023, the way it would be written in the invoice. And we're going to run it again. And my answer is not a number. Why? Well, let's see. Let's do a search. And when you're looking for code, always start with the language that you're searching for. Yeah, because otherwise you're going to find a bunch of articles that talk about PHP and stuff like that. And the syntax is different and it's going to confuse you. So JavaScript, I have a string and I want to replace something. And you get a bunch of results. If I can give you a tip, even though W3 schools ends up at the top in many cases, we're probably going to be better off with the Mozilla documentation in here. W3 schools is not bad, but it's sometimes very, very simple in what they only show. So this is usually better documentation. So it says the pattern can be a string or a regular expression, and the replacement can be a string or a function. And then it says, if pattern is a string, only the first occurrence will be replaced. And this is exactly what we see here. We do replacement of the periods to nothing, but as the documentation says, only the first occurrence will be replaced. So it will probably replace this dot, but it won't touch this dot. And that's of course not what we want. We want to replace everything. Can we fix that? Well, it says if pattern is a string, only the first occurrence will be replaced, which means that if it's a regular expression, and we already know what these things are, luckily, if it's a regular expression, then it's going to replace everything. So that's the answer. Instead of writing a string, I'm going to write a regular expression, and I'm going to do this. So this is my boundaries of my regular expression. And the only thing I need is a dot, because that's what we're looking for. However, as you remember, the dot is a special character in a regular expression. So if I really just want a dot, I need to escape it with a backslash. Is this confusing to you? Well, take this, put it into the website, and it will explain to you what it is again. So it added the right modifier that we already had as well. And it will now explain to you what this thing is, the literal character dot, not the dot that means any single character. Does that really fix things? Actually, it does, because now it doesn't just convert the first dot, it converts both of them. And you have exactly what you want. Be careful when you do stuff like this. I do two replacements, a dot to nothing, and then a comma to a dot. If you do it in the opposite order, you're going to end up with a much bigger number, because then you're first going to replace the comma with a dot, and then that dot is going to be replaced by nothing again. So the result would be, in this particular case, very different. But this looks relatively simple. It's probably going to be quite fast, and it should give us what we're looking for. Of course, I would have to see what happens if I have a negative number, and some other cases if I want to do good checking, but I think in this case, it will probably work just fine. It might fail on things that are not a number or that have incorrect definitions. So if I have something that like this, where there are two commas in it and so on, we might end up with something that doesn't work, but then the result is going to be, because I have number here, the result is going to be not a number, NaN, and that is probably a good error condition as well. So whoever calls this function would then get NaN back, and that is probably fine. Yeah. If you want to return 0 instead of NaN, you could do that too, but it could be confusing because, well, if you enter 0 in as a currency string, it would return 0, and if there is an error, it will also return 0. So that's confusing. Answering with not a number in case something goes wrong is probably absolutely fine. Yes, let's just show one other way of doing it. So we're going to do the same thing there. And what did I concoct here? Well, very similar to what we've done the previous time, and just again to show you that there are different ways of doing it. Let's use our beloved split again. So currency string. This really is a function I use quite a lot because it's very versatile. So I can do split, and in this case, I'm going to split on a comma. There should only be one comma, so that's absolutely absolutely fine. And I can see I made a mistake in the preparation that I've done because I haven't done proper error checking on all kinds of different cases. So what do I want? How many parts do I need to have? Well, I could have one because the number could just look like this, and then I don't have a comma. If I split that, it's just going to give me an array with one element in it. Or I can have two if I have something behind the comma, and that's it. That's all the possibilities that I have. So what I could say is if part's length is larger than 2, then I'm going to return not a number, because I know that shouldn't happen, and that's an error. Yeah. So what do I have now? Well, if I return this, I have something that is that doesn't work. That's good. So let's call something that that does work. So what I have as a result is an array with 2 parts. The second part is already okay. Those are the things behind the decimal point. That is fine. The first part now has dots in it, and we don't want dots. So I could do the replace trick again, but we're going the route of splitting and joining. So let's do that. So what I'm going to do is, and you can check my work afterwards, I'm going to say let result equal parts 0. So the first part, which is this section here, splits on the dots, join without anything, plus a dot, plus, this is very dangerous what I do now because I can make mistakes, but we'll see. And then I want to return the result. Ooh. There we go. And I want the result to be a number, obviously. There. So what does this do? It takes part 0, which was, if I go back to my array, it was this part, the 1 million. It splits it on a dot. That means I get an array with 1, 0, 0, 0, and 0, 0, 0, so 3 elements. I join it, but I don't join it with a dot again. I join it with nothing. So now I get a string that is just 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, which is what I want. And then to that, I add the a dot, a decimal dot, and parts 1 and parts 1, that was the decimal part. And that gives me exactly a string that I can convert to a number. Again, I have 2 ways of doing it. Which way you prefer is up to you. Yeah? I wouldn't worry too much about, is this going to be faster? Is this going to be faster? In all likelihood, in any of the JavaScripts you're going to write, it's not going to make a difference. Yeah? If you want to, you could go to, I'm sure someone has found a way to do this in one single regular expression. I'm absolutely certain of it. I'm not even going to attempt it. I'm sure if you search on Stack Overflow, you'll find it. And I'm sure you'll probably also find an article that explains which 5 methods there are and which is the fastest. But in the end, the only thing that counts, I think, is which of these things gives you the better result, which one do you understand better, and just go with that one. The additional millisecond that you win by using replace instead of split and join, that's not going to make the difference unless you're doing something that has to happen 2 billion times a second. Yeah. And if it really has to happen 2 billion times a second, you probably shouldn't be using JavaScript in the first place. So don't worry about it too much. Questions? No? Everyone is afraid of asking something. That's fine. So it's only an hour and 10 minutes. It's more reasonable than what we've had in some of these other cafes. I hope this was useful. It is a little bit different in the sense that, of course, these are only 2 examples, and each question you're going to get that you want to implement in JavaScript is going to be different. But like I said at the beginning, I hope this showed not only how you can solve a particular problem, but maybe also a little bit about the methodology behind it and what the best way is to do this. And once more, and let me stress this, I have a lot of experience in writing JavaScript. too much. But this really is the way I would write this in a production context as well. The only difference is I wouldn't explain it out loud while I'm writing it. And sometimes I even do that because it makes it clear what happens. But writing it part by part, starting with writing different use cases, things that, well, different strings that you want to try, making it easy to try them. All of those are things that are important. So, for example, if I would do this, I would probably advise you to do something like, I could write something like strings, and then I can have multiple examples of these things. And I could include something that has no decimal points and has a negative, and maybe one that is just one but doesn't have a decimal point. And so you can include all kinds of examples in there. And instead of just doing this, I could then use I'll use a classic loop. So, and then we're going to have this thing in here, and this should then be, I think this is correct. And when I do that, does it actually show me something? Yes, it shows that it is not defined because it's called strings. There. And if you do it in this way, you can see what happens here. And actually, this probably shows that there is part of what I'm doing that is not working. If you do it in this way, then it is going to be much easier to see whether the function you're writing is actually working for all of the cases. Yeah. And like I said, I think it is actually not working for some of the stuff I do here, and I would need to figure out why it's not working. It does the first one, it doesn't do the two second ones, and I think that's because of the split I'm doing here that it does, or the split I'm doing there that it doesn't work. And I haven't even caught that while I did that. So, and the reason I haven't caught it is because opposed to here where I prepared all of the different cases, I thought that this was so simple that I didn't have to do it. And the lesson to take home is it's never so simple that you don't have to do it. It's always better to come up with different use cases and then make sure that your tests will show where you go wrong. Cool. So much for this. I don't know yet, but I am what the next one will be. I promised at the beginning that I was going to do something about ES6 syntax and the more advanced stuff. I still want to do that. It needs a little bit of preparation on my side because I need to refresh some of the things I want to show. It's not, I don't use all of these things as frequently as I use all of this stuff. So I'm still planning to do it. I will announce it on the Facebook Café when I know what the date for that is, but that's probably going to be the next one. I also promised to look at the scripting environment in Switch, both the legacy one and the new one. So those sessions I will schedule as well. And in the meantime, if you have questions or you would want to see something specific on in a cafe on JavaScript or something else, don't hesitate and write me an email or put it on the 4-piece Facebook 4Ps Café Facebook page. That's the right order. And if you don't have my email address, that's the shortest form for that. And apparently it's not valid JavaScript, so I have to put it in between quotes. Yeah, so send me an email if you want with questions or remarks, and I'll be happy to look at those as well. And as soon as I know when we can do these other sessions, I will schedule them. I'll try to give you a couple of weeks advance notice so that you can put them in the calendar if you really want to join them. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you very much for joining. As I said, the recording will be online as soon as it is converted, and we can post it on YouTube. And meanwhile, if you have any remarks, just post them on the Café. Have a great day, and don't dream of JavaScript too much.